Hey guys, what is up and welcome to another League of Legends video. So I did release a full gameplay of the new Season 5 jungle on the PBE, but many people have requested, as I asked in the video, to make somewhat of a more concise video talking about all the new jungle changes and just changes overall coming to Season 5. And that's exactly what this video's intent will be. I'll do my best to tell you guys about all of the changes for the jungle that you need to know about, and a few other things as well. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the video. So there are of course quite a few things that we need to cover, but let's start it all off with the 4 new jungle items. Because now with the new jungle items, Riot's intent seems to be to try and put more flexibility on Smite, and just really give it a lot more variety. So the first thing to note is the fact that Smite is now at 60-second cooldown. And the cool thing is the fact that now Smite will show its damage right on top of the ability, so you don't always have to keep mousing over. And with that, they also put the HP of the main jungle monsters like Dragon, Baron, Blue buff, Red buff right on top of the monster, so you don't have to keep mousing over it and looking at the top left of your screen. And they also buffed up all of the monsters in the jungle a tad, but also increased the rewards for killing them. So now let's talk about the new items, but first let's begin with the Hunter's Machete, which did get a little bit of a rework. This item now, as you can see, costs 400 gold rather than the current 325, which does unfortunately mean that you can only start with 2 HP pots. But the cool thing is now it deals 30 magic damage over 2 seconds, and if you are in combat with monsters, which are the jungle camps, you will get 8 HP and 3 mana per second. Definitely helping out with the sustainability. Now this upgrades into one of 4 items: a Poacher's Knife, Stalker's Blade, Skirmisher's Saber, or the Ranger's Trailblazer. None of these items actually give any stats. They upgrade the magic damage and the amount of HP and mana you receive. But the main thing that they do upgrade is what your Smite can now do. So let's talk about the Poacher's Knife. You definitely want to pick up this bad boy if your intent in the game is to counter jungle your opponent. And when I say counter jungle, I don't mean necessarily invade them and fight them, more of just taking their jungle minions. Because smiting in the enemy jungle will reduce your smite's cooldown just for that instance by half. On top of that, you'll get 20 bonus gold if the smite does the finishing blow, and you'll even get a huge move speed buff that decays over 2 seconds, so that you can get out of there as soon as possible. Another option that is somewhat similar to the Poacher's Knife is the Ranger's Trailblazer. You also want to get this if you want to either counter jungle or just farm your jungle as much as possible. So someone like a Nocturne. This one will reduce Smite's base cooldown by 15 seconds, which will make it 45. It will also help you clear your jungle monsters faster, because smiting them will now deal half of the smite's damage in AoE and stun the people around them as well for a second and a half. And as if it's not good enough already, it'll also restore 15% of your missing HP and mana, offering huge sustainability. The next 2 items we will talk about are ones that allow your smite to be used on champions. So let's start things off by talking about the Stalker's Blade. Like I said, this is a lot more PvP oriented, so if you want to gank or jungle invade often. So this will now allow you to use smite on champions, something completely unheard of from before. And if you do smite a champion, it will deal about 10% of your smite's damage as true damage. On top of that, it will also slow your target's move speed by about half for 2 seconds. And if this one doesn't seem to be to your liking, there's always a second option. And that option is the Skirmisher's Saber. This one will give your smite the power to put a 6-second mark on your target. And what that mark does is your auto attacks against that target will now deal a percentage of your smite's damage per auto attack as true damage. And on top of that, you'll have vision of your target for the duration of the mark, and you'll even take reduced damage from that target, but that target only. So those are the 4 items that you can choose between to upgrade your smite. Some of you might be thinking that these items will just end up taking up a slot later in the game and not really scale. Well, luckily for us, Riot thought about that as well, and they added 4 different upgrades that you can choose between to further upgrade your jungle item. And this works much like the way you would upgrade your boots to, for instance, Home Guard. So let's quickly go into the 4 upgrades. The first one we'll talk about is Devourer. This is pretty much your Season 5 equivalent of Feral Flare, and is more suited towards the auto-attacking heavy junglers, because the stats it offers are 50% attack speed, 40 magic damage on hit, and a unique passive that will increase this item's damage by 1 whenever you kill a large monster in the jungle, or 2 if you get a champion kill or assist. The next one we'll talk about is called Juggernaut. This item is oriented towards tanky junglers because it offers 500 HP, 10% CDR, and tenacity, which of course is a unique passive. Following that, we have the Mage's upgrade. This item is geared towards AP heavy junglers because it offers 80 ability power, 20% CDR. And finally, the last one is called Warrior, which is oriented towards AD duelers who like to use a lot of spells, maybe Lee Sin. And it offers 45 attack damage, 10% CDR, and 10 armor penetration. So that is all the information you need to know in terms of the items. Next, we will talk about the effects that happen whenever you smite a jungle camp. because Riot decided to introduce this new mechanic as well. So smiting a jungle camp now has even more benefits, but it also makes you have to choose somewhat carefully. The first one we'll talk about are the wolves. Keep in mind, none of these smites actually have to kill the target, it just has to be used on it at some time. And if you were to smite the wolves, it will actually create a spirit that will look after the blue buff nearest to that wolf camp. And you can see right now on the screen the green little spirit that is moving towards the blue buff. The next camp we'll talk about are the Krugs, or as you better know them, the Golems. If you were to smite this camp, it will give you a buff that will stun monsters in the jungle every 1st and 5th auto attack. But a cool thing is that you can end the duration of this buff at any time by auto attacking a turret, and that first auto attack will deal bonus damage to the turret as well. The third camp we'll talk about is the Grump, or as I'm sure you know it as, the White. Smiting this one will also give you a buff, but this one will poison enemies that attack you, dealing damage over time for about 3 seconds. Then of course we have the Raptors, or as they're currently called, the Wraiths, which if you smite will give you a very interesting buff. This one will let you spot the next ward that you pass by, on top of also giving you true vision, which will of course let you kill the ward. It acts exactly like the upgraded Oracle Lens Trinket will. Following this, we have the red buff, which if you use smite on it will give you back HP. And while you have the red buff on you, you'll also get an increase in HP regeneration. And the rest is pretty much the same. And last but not least, the blue buff, which if you smite it, as I'm sure you can guess, will just simply give you back mana instantly. And the final thing is now there's a new jungle camp, which is actually in the river, so I guess you can call it a river camp. And it is this scuttle crab that you see me attacking right now. It is on both sides of the river, and it is also very important. It is extremely tanky, but does take additional damage if it's slowed. And if your team kills it, it will make a shrine beside the dragon or baron pit, depending on which side you killed it. This shrine will offer yourself and your team a move speed buff as you pass through it, on top of giving you vision of that area for the 90 seconds before it respawns. The next thing we'll talk about is the new dragon, because on top of it looking now 100 times better than before, it also interacts a lot differently within the game. And in my honest opinion, it's a lot better as well, because now it feels a lot more influential. So here's how it now works. First off, it no longer grants global gold to your team, and every time your team slays dragon, you will get a buff called Dragon Slayer, which will stack up to 5 times, with each stack giving you more and more bonuses. The first stack will give you and your team 8% AP and AD, the second one will give 15% bonus damage to minions and monsters, the third stack will give plus 5% to your move speed, fourth stack will give 15% additional damage to buildings and towers, and the fifth stack will double all the other 4 bonuses. Your attacks will now do 150 true damage to champions over 3 seconds, and it'll last for 180 seconds. One major thing to note is that for every stack your team has, Dragon will not only be more resilient towards your attacks, aka take less damage, but it will also deal more damage to your team, thus making it harder to kill each consecutive time. And the final thing to note is the fact that Dragon's auto attacks are now AoE. Then of course you have the new Baron, also with plus 100% extra swag. And Baron also has some pretty influential changes. He still grants 40 AP and AD with his buff, but now he offers your team an empowered recall, which pretty much just reduces your recall time by half. But here's the major one. If you have the buff and you have minions nearby, the Baron buff will pretty much inspire these minions, giving them buffs as well. And here's how the buffs work. For the melee minions, it will give them 80% damage reduction from almost all damage types. The range minions get increased damage and a minor range increase. The siege minions get a huge range increase that can outrange the towers, but the auto attack is slower, but on the contrary, it also does 4 times damage to towers. And finally, the super minions will get a 75% move speed buff and a 25% attack speed buff. And right now in the video you can see how it looks like when they get inspired. Following this, let's talk about the changes done to the towers. There's nothing completely major here, but it is definitely worth talking about. So the first tower, or the outer towers, have no changes, but the inner towers, the second one, does. Since these towers are usually very difficult to defend, especially if you're behind, so the tower now has a shield on itself, while also granting it to nearby allied champions. The tower has a 200 HP shield that regenerates after 30 seconds, and friendly champions get a shield that stacks up 30 HP per second up to 300, and if you leave the tower range, the shield will decay over 2 seconds. And the inhibitor towers now fire a laser, which not only slows the target it is hitting, but it also reduces the damage that they deal, which is to prevent split pushing and tower diving under those towers. The next thing we should cover are the new elixirs, because the old ones, the red and blue ones, are now gone, and instead replaced with 4 new ones, each of them costing 400 gold. The first one is called Elixir of Ruin, which gives HP, bonus damage to towers, and gives that bonus to minions as well, on top of also giving the minions extra move speed. Elixir of Viren increases your size by 25%, gives you slow resistance, tenacity, and leaves a path behind you that increases allied champs' move speed by 15%. Elixir of Sorcery increases your AP by 40, 15 bonus MP5, and deals 25 bonus true damage to champions and towers, but it has a 5-second cooldown towards champions, but none towards towers. And the final one is Elixir of Wrath, which gives you 25 to your AD, and it heals you for 10% of damage dealt to champions. On top of that, kills or assists will prolong the duration of this elixir by 30 seconds. There are also a couple new items coming out to Season 5 as well, but I won't talk about the new items because items seem to always change before actual release, and in my opinion they aren't anything special either. So that wraps up for this video, guys. Those are the major changes that I feel like are very important for you guys to know about. Quick shout out to cloth5.com, I used their article to help me make this video, so check it out in the description as well. If you did enjoy this video and found it useful or informative, please don't forget to throw in a like and share it with your friends. And I hope to see you guys for the next video. Peace!